The United States became a country because of the fact that we took the law into our own hands. We took Great Britain's tea and threw it into the Boston Harbor. We faced struggles and came out victorious.
This is the attitude that got us to where we are today. This is the attitude that made us become who we truly are as Americans. We have used this dynamic strategy throughout our history to excel and succeed in our goals.
However, that behavior sometimes had the ability to lead to violent outcomes. Throughout history, America has used brutal and cruel ways to handle situations such as the American expansion out west.
As Brooks Adams said, as consolidation advances, fear yields to greed, and the economic organism tends to supersede the emotional and martial. He believed that the human race goes through periods of chaos before civilization, when they form new civilizations and venture forwards.
Vigilantism has often been associated with the American West, but it actually started way before then. An example of this early vigilantism is seen in dueling. In the 18th century, dueling was a gentlemanly way of solving an argument, and it was seen as a way to defend your honor. Duels were in place to solve social justice issues that had no support in the judicial system.
There was even a document called the Code Duello, which had 26 rules, outlining all aspects of the duel. The rules ranged from what time you could conduct the duel to how many shots were required for the satisfaction of honor. This document showed how ingrained dueling was in the culture and problem solving of the 19th century.
These duels sometimes ended in a violent way, with one opponent either getting severely hurt or dying. Although there were some laws against dueling, the majority of people ignored them.
Duels were being outlawed in the North when Alexander Hamilton and Aaron Burr had a duel in Weehawken, New Jersey. Alexander Hamilton was the founding father who created the United States financial system. Aaron Burr was another founding father, the third vice president of the U.S., and one of the officers in the Continental Army.
Hamilton had been involved in 10 duels before, 7 times a dueler and 3 times an assistant. Those duels tended to be resolved before the final stage of a duel with the gun face-off. This duel was fueled by Burr's hatred for Hamilton, as Hamilton had campaigned for Thomas Jefferson during the election of 1800.
This was a large reason for Burr losing the presidential election and becoming vice president instead. In addition, Hamilton wrote letters that were published that spoke against Burr for the gubernatorial election of 1804. The concept of honor was very important to the men and to society at the time, so it was deemed more honorable to duel than apologize.
On July 11, 1804, Alexander Hamilton was fatally shot in the abdomen during the duel and died from his injuries the next day. Meanwhile, Burr was acquitted from the murder charges in New York and New Jersey, but never took office again and was shunned from politics.
The 19th century. This was a century of vigilantism and vigilante groups. There were famous gunfighters, frequent homicides, and lynchings. One example is the mob lynching that took place in New Orleans in the late 19th century. In New Orleans in 1891, a huge mob, mobilized by a local vigilance committee, stormed the city jail and lynched 11 Italian immigrants, alleged to be mafia leaders responsible for the assassination of a high-ranking police official.
This lynching, as well as other violent acts committed by vigilante groups, shows the savagery and brutality that they will go to in order to solve a dispute or issue.
There were some efforts made to create order through vigilantism, like the San Francisco's Vigilante Constitution of May 15, 1856. This document created the Committee of Vigilantes, which established basic conduct and order. These unofficial governments were a way to maintain control of the area without using the U.S. government.
However, in some parts of the U.S., like Arkansas, violence still continued. Even when forms of government were created, they would be corrupt and inefficient, which would lead to citizens dealing with problems themselves. Governors took little interest in the state, judges would duel each other, and on multiple occasions, kill each other. Even the government was laced with vigilantism. The lack of government was no longer the example of chaos in Arkansas, but it was the actual government.
In New Mexico, corruption and bribes were viewed as the way things have always been. Corruption was its own form of government. Citizens and politicians ignoring the law and taking matters into their own hands through bribes, favors, and corruption was how New Mexico functioned from way back in the 19th century and into the 21st century.
When the 13th and 14th Amendment came into being, white Southerners felt that a sense of their honor was being threatened. The equalization of African American people was terrifying to poor white Southerners, who were trying to grasp onto the things that left them ahead in society. After the Civil War, those same Southerners created the Lost Cause, Jim Crow laws, and other such ways to keep their level in society.
This included terror organizations such as the Ku Klux Klan, which harmed the African Americans as a way to keep what they perceived to be their rightfully owned spot in their culture. Lynching was a common way to terrorize the African American community. The lynching of blacks in the South is another example of where Americans feel compelled to take justice into their own hands, where they believe the legitimate justice system has let them down.
Even though in modern society we tend to stray away from the old vigilante ways of dealing with issues, some forms of vigilantism still exist.
In the state of Florida, the Stand Your Ground law can be seen as a form of modern-day vigilantism. The law reads that if a person lawfully uses deadly force self-defense, then that person is immune from criminal prosecution in that case. In other words, if you kill someone to save yourself because you had a reasonable fear you were going to be harmed, you will not be charged with killing that person. That provision applies even if you could have gotten away from that situation safely.
The American attitude of vigilantism has modified itself in modern America to be legalized and a protected right under the law. Instead of contacting local officials to take care of the threat, you have the right to protect yourself if you feel the need to do so.
In February of 2012, a neighborhood watch captain named George Zimmerman in Stanford, Florida, reported a suspicious person. Although he was instructed by police to not leave his car and approach the person, Zimmerman did not listen, and moments later Zimmerman shot the individual, unarmed, 17-year-old African-American Trayvon Martin.
Although Zimmerman was told not to engage, he did anyway. He decided to take care of the problem he saw personally. Although Martin had not posed a threat to Zimmerman and was heard screaming for help as he was shot, Zimmerman still killed him while being protected by Florida law. In the end, Zimmerman claimed self-defense for the death of Martin and was convicted with manslaughter. This situation acts as a form of honored vigilantism.
Though when looking back, the acts of vigilantism seem hard to imagine as justifiable, we can still see the vigilante mindset in the laws and crimes of the modern day. This existed because the function of courts and the government were either faulty or decisions unpopular. This led the American people to use their own methods and force to achieve the results they wanted, though illegal. But in the 21st century, the need for this mindset and methods in our laws and courts seem contradictory to all the efforts made to civilize the United States.
People throughout American history and present feel as though the justice of the law is not justice enough.